Hello, everyone. This is part 1 of session 15 of Pre-Socratics to Augustine, also called History of Philosophy 1. We are talking about Plato's Republic, and in the last recording, we discussed a really famous conversation between Socrates and the so-called lovers of sights and sounds. And one upshot of that conversation is the so-called Two Worlds Doctrine. And that is one of the most difficult components of what people more or less tend to think Plato puts forward as a theory. So what are the two worlds here? What is the proposal? The thought is quite related to the kinds of issues that we discussed right from the beginning of the semester when we were talking about Parmenides. So one world is the world of the forms, the world of intelligibles. And the idea is that intelligibles and forms are actually kind of defined as the kind of thing to which we have access by thinking. And they are the only thing of which we can have knowledge. And then the other world is the world of the perceptibles. And even more sort of precisely speaking, the world of perceptible particulars. Because the world of perceptibles consists of, items, trees, people, leaves of grass, whatever. So those are perceptible particulars. Now, those are the things of which we have doxa, which we have translated as opinion or belief, and we don't have knowledge of them. Now, the Two Worlds Doctrine is so famous in part because it raises real problems. And today's recording is devoted to these problems and to the question of whether they actually are problems for Plato or whether he has responses to them. The thought is that if you imagine there really are these two domains, that is another word that you can use instead of two worlds. If you think there are these two domains, the intelligible and knowable, the forms, on the one hand, and the perceptible, which is the object of doxa, on the other hand, that can seem to have two implausible implications. And the first of these implausible implications is that it would seem that, according to this view, we cannot have knowledge of perceptible particulars. And at least for a while in 20th century scholarship on Plato, people thought that that was unacceptably implausible. That was kind of crazy, as it were, to say, here's my cup of tea, and Plato's telling me that I cannot know that there's my cup of tea. Isn't that, it would have sort of seemed from the point of view of epistemology, say in the second half of the 20th century, people thought, but that is kind of a paradigmatic case of knowledge. I have something like standing right in front of me. I have like optimal, viewing conditions. I just know that there is a cup of tea. And so how can Plato possibly say that that doesn't qualify as knowledge? Now, given what we have studied so far, given that we started with Parmenides and so on and so forth, for us, that is not a surprise. For us, it is kind of clear that Plato is serious about this. That is not knowledge. Why is it not knowledge? Because knowledge always has something to do with giving an account of something, with a kind of general understanding of what X is or what something is. And you could have knowledge of what tea is. What kind of plant is a tea plant as opposed to a palm tree? That is the kind of thing that you could know because you could ask, one of these what is X questions. What is a palm tree? What is an apple tree? What for any plant, you could ask that question and then you could know the answer. But you cannot know this is a cup of tea. This is like, here's an apple or that kind of thing, because that is not the kind of thing, a general thing that would be even a candidate for being knowledge. So here we kind of have prepared the ground by the sorts of things that we have studied so far for finding Plato's idea quite comprehensible. You may not accept it, but we can sort of see the intuition behind it. The second problem is potentially more puzzling, and that is that we cannot have a doxa about something that is ultimately intelligible. And, we also already know the intuition here. Well, intelligibles are the kinds of things about which we are thinking, and they are, where you get real truth, and they are where you ultimately get knowledge. And the doxa simply isn't, like an opinion, simply isn't the kind of thing, the kind of mental state by which you relate to something like that. But the problem may seem to be that, as long as we don't know, let's say, what justice is or what goodness is, what else can we do other than try and come up with beliefs about it? And we talked about those difficulties of, what can we do in inquiry? If we don't yet know something, we have to come up with, in one way or another, with what seems to us, and then maybe we can make it into a hypothesis, or we do something such as not to assert it in a dogmatic way. But if we are not going to be able to have any kind of belief or seeming or doxa about things that ultimately we want to understand, it might seem that we cannot even begin to inquire, and that would be a really problematic upshot. So your homework puzzle for today is to think about one of the examples for this, which come up in the Republic, and just ask yourself sort of what kind of status this doxa has. Socrates is talking about people who hold the view that pleasure is the good. Now that view is false. And hence, it cannot be a view that is, as it were, successful in referring to goodness, the form of the good. Hence, it must be a doxa. But it is not about a particular, it is somehow general. So it's kind of tricky to see why this cannot even be a candidate for kind of moving towards knowledge, or how is this a doxa? What is the kind of mental state that someone is in who thinks the thought pleasure is the good?